It is Thursday, the 15th of November, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK and internationally. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So we're recording in your flat today, Alice.
We are.
Listeners may be able to tell from the
occasional clanking from the dog jumping at the door handle.
Dog jumping
you mentioned
jumping
the dog.
at the door.
I thought you were going to say listeners can tell from like the change in ambience of the
No.
echo. And
I mean,
God, you think our listeners really do pay way more attention than they actually do to this.
The
shit.
episode, the recording when we tape here is a little bit more echoey than it is in our normal thing, but only a little bit more echoey.
Nobody
Listeners may
noticed.
also be able to tell from the glass breaking sounds of Marsh's car being broken into outside.
Yeah, that we're in
outside. You didn't bring your car this time.
No, it'll be my bike that gets stolen today.
Right, okay. Because this is the first time we've taped here since your car was just randomly and senselessly trashed.
Senselessly trashed. They put a window out. They stole my ancient old iPhone. Disgusting behaviour. Yeah.
It's terrible. Terrible. And Alan, so you were so indignant about it, you decided to move out.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I have nothing to gain from this neighbourhood anymore.
That's why there's so many cardboard boxes around. I thought you were just trying to do rudimentary kind of soundproofing, sort of, echo dampening, having had a deluge of listener complaints about the echo the last time we recorded.
We've had hundreds of cardboard boxes stacked up in our flat for the last several months. It's driving me crazy.
So I've recently had a trip to London. I was down there, for work in the initial instance, but then, I did some touristy stuff when I was down there as well.
Okay.
Which was fun. So I went to the Welcome Collection.
It's one of my favourite places in London.
Which
I love
is
the Welcome Collection.
It's brilliant. I went to the reading room in the Welcome Collection.
Yeah, the big back room with all sorts of just random stuff stuck in there, seemingly collected at random.
Went and found Simon Singh's book in there. That Trick or Treatment was in there.
Went into the proper library room rather than the actual hall.
No, I didn't go into the proper library room because you're not.
You have to get special permission to go in there.
You're not allowed to wander in there. But I did find Simon Singh's book in the reading room and went, here we go. Look, there's Simon's book. So that was quite good, along with a load of woo books in there as well. But
nice,
that was quite good.
Bengal Dicker's Bad Science. That's not fair. That's not fair.
Fair. So, but they had two exhibitions on at the time. They had one called Medicine Now and one called Medicine Man.
Okay.
And Medicine Now was kind of stuff that's happening now.
Yeah, and then Medicine Man with Sean Connery in a wig in the rainforest.
The more interesting exhibition was Medicine Man, which was all the stuff that Mr. Wellcome, I've forgotten what it is, Henry Wellcome, all the stuff that Henry Wellcome had collected.
It's a tiny fraction of what Henry Wellcome collected.
Absolutely,
he collected rooms and rooms and rooms and rooms full of stuff.
Are we just celebrating what is effectively a hoarder?
He genuinely was. He collected so much stuff.
Really?
That room in the Welcome Collection is an eclectic mix of random things that he collected. He collected thousands of things, so many things. When he died, they had to spend years and years and years sorting through all of his stuff and giving it away, selling it, giving it to other galleries. It's incredible.
Blimey.
One of my favourite things that they had in there was a phrenology skull from the 18 whatevers. They had a phrenology skull, but because there are two competing schools of phrenology, half the skull was in one school and half the skull was in the other school.
Wow, like a left brain, right brain for phrenology.
So that was fun. That was in a account with another thing which actually kind of wound me up, which was some fake ears sandals. So it was like a bed of nails, but shoes.
Yes.
And it was like, you have to meditate and train for many years to be able to walk in these shoes. It's like, fuck off. You're science. You're meant to know better than this bullshit. What on earth are you talking about with their fake ear sandals?
Maybe you mean walk in in these shoes in a metaphorical sense? to really be able to picture what it's like living the lifestyle of a fake ear? I think that's what it was.
So that was fun. And they had an odd collection of small figurines that were kind of half horse, half cock, which was like the hind quarters of a horse, but then the front quarters
of a cock
was just a cock.
Okay.
With a little jockey on it as well.
Right, like a knob jockey.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I think he was a knob jockey. That bloke. But it was really cool looking at, and they had like bone saws, a big line of bone saws as well, kind of nice shiny ones at one end and rusty ones at the other. I'm not sure which ones were from the Saudi embassy, but they had this big collection of bone saws there, which was really good. But I really enjoyed the welcome collection.
Did you see Charles Darwin's tiny walking stick?
Charles Darwin's walking stick they had on it, which
I'm not sure I saw that.
They had this walking cane with like a skull on the end, and I thought, fucking hell, that's macabre. And then the little caption is like, Charles Darwin's walking stick. It's like, fucking hell, he's a creepy bastard, wasn't he? I'm suddenly pro-Lamarck here. That's
What kind of skull was it?
Like just a little human skull that had just kind of been carved on the end of his stick.
Carved on the end. I thought you meant actually a human skull.
Not an entire human.
It's like a little one, like a baby skull. And yes, he invented evolution, but it is about baby killing. It turns out it was about baby killing and baby eating all along. The Christians were right.
The little caption card thing says it was Memento Mori. It was him kind of going, it's just a reminder of my own mortality, so I'm going to wander around with a skull on the end of my walking stick for some reason. But as Alice intimated, it's tiny.
It's tiny. He must have been a tiny man.
Well,
it was really short.
People were small back then, especially by the time he needed it. He'd been a bit hunched over.
Bit hunched over,
He was sort of doing the opposite of the ascent of man. By the end of his life, he was actually ironically dragging his knuckles along
the floor. Yeah. So I did that. I went to the Body Worlds exhibit as well while I was down in London as well, which is that guy who plasticizes
Gunter.
Human remains. Which again was really interesting. I know you guys went to it when it was in Liverpool, but I didn't go to it at that point because I had other stuff on. So it's the first time I've gone down and seen.
Did you not go to it then?
No, I didn't.
I'm sure you were there.
I'm sure you were there.
No, I wasn't.
Oh no, you weren't because that's right. Yeah, people trying to get in contact with you thinking you'd be there and you weren't there,
and I wasn't there.
I remember.
Yeah, but that was really good. I really enjoyed that. Although I did feel mildly persecuted. The first exhibit you go into was the brain. It was all like, this is the brain, this is the nervous system, and they had this plasticized brain. That
was it a male brain or a female brain?
Of course, it was a male brain.
Yeah, almost everything. There were relatively few women there as well. So I got in there and they had this plasticized brain, and they had the spinal cord down as well, and they kind of the casing that the spinal cord is in, they slit down and then folded it out, so it was like the spinal. You could see all the nerve bundles inside resting on top of what was now a long rectangle of flesh, where the tube that was the casing had been slit open and spread open. And then as it went down, they kind of splayed them out even more, so you could see the nerve bundles kind of being spread out and like kind of unwoven, and that really creeped me out.
But you felt persecuted by it?
I did.
Like it was a threat?
Well, what I felt persecuted by is that as you go into the brain exhibition, it was like... and this is what happens when the brain is too stressed, and the tyranny of choice. And you need to stop being stressed and relax more. Mike, you need to relax more, Mike. Mike, specifically, you need to... I was all right, steady. Someone fucking phoned ahead and told them that I'm coming. So then the next room that you go into is the heart room, and it's like, this is how the cardiovascular system works, and, you've got the hearts and the carved out sides of hearts so you can see the inside and the various chambers, etc., which again was really interesting. But that was also, and this is what stress does to the heart, Mike. Mike, have you thought about what your heart is going? Fucking hell, leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, this is what happens when the heart isn't beating fast enough over a period of years. Yeah.
And then I got down to a part where it had exhibition continues this way and exhibition continues that way in two different directions. And I thought, why? How can it continue in both directions?
I think there's a lung and a liver.
Tyranny of choice, Mike.
Yeah, it was the tyranny of choice. And I sat there for many, many hours trying to figure out which one I was going to do.
Like Meridian's ass. I think there was a lung and a kidney in each, and it's just a way of sort of making it a bit easier to get around. Everything where there's two of them, one in each side, is fine. So I went, I just chose a direction at random, went around, and it turned out it was the sex bit. And the reason it was going in two directions, it was like, if you're 16,
go this way.
You go to sex bit. And because as I was wandering in, there's some poor mum there with their 5-year-old covering their eyes as they kind of bundle them out of the sex bit, having not noticed the sign that said 16 plus. But you go in there, and then there's just two people having sex in there.
You mean that was a woman then, or did they just go with men because that's what they had? Like
reverse cowgirl, which I thought was an interesting choice. Not what I would have assumed would be the way that they would do it, but it turned out because what they'd done is they had also split open her abdomen so you could see the penis, the way it fit inside her, and how that worked. And it was like, all right, so it's all about same reason you use reverse cowgirl in porn, basically, isn't it? For the visibility of the penis. This is what it was about. So they did that, and I was looking at it, and the first thing I thought was, is this still necrophilia if you're both dead? It's certainly necro.
It's not a philia.
Nobody's phillying this. No one's enjoying this.
I think it was voyeuristic necrophilia. That you were there watching dead bodies have sex.
The other thing is that are these a couple? Or are these just two
random bodies?
Two dead strangers
it's
fucking?
It'll be random. There's
It'll be
no
random
way
bodies,
they're going to do a couple.
It's two dead strangers fucking in an exhibition in London.
Well, there's no way to make them acquainted now. Of course they're strangers. Like Steve meet Julie. How's it going to happen?
And now they're made of plastic as well, so he's going for a while. Some guys are like, I can only manage a couple of minutes. He's like, I'm here for the next 10,000 years. But Body Worlds was really, really good, and I really, really enjoyed that.
The thing is, once they've plasticized them, but they shouldn't have plasticized them, because now they're going to end up in an ocean somewhere.
Yes.
And you're going to have a dead male cock, smothering a tortoise.
That guy's going to be sitting there fucking until he's broken into microplastics and eaten by a fish.
You're going to pull his cock out of a tortoise and go, that's why this tortoise wasn't doing very well. He had a plasticized cock in there.
Can you say tortoise?
I forget which of them it's meant to be. Tortoise, terrapin, or turtle. So I just very much varied amongst them there on the fly.
Tortuga.
Did you also see the sliver of a man in the Wellcome Trust? You've just seen slivers of resin.
Yes.
Resin
yeah. Slivers of
You've
human
just gone
beings
around London.
Collection.
You've gone around London looking at plasticized dead bodies.
Things. Mostly looking at dead things while I was there. The other place that I went to when I was there was I went to the Horniman Museum.
Oh, yeah.
Literally the Horny Man Museum.
Horny Man Museum, yeah.
Which I went to because they had this enormous stuffed walrus.
Okay.
Which is it's their mascot. They use it on their logo. It's been exhibited there since like 1836 or something like that.
It's like what's the one that had Dippy the Diplodocus?
Oh, the Natural History Museum.
It's like the National History Museum. That's their mascot. Like Dippy,
is it?
Dippy,
Right.
Dippy was famous.
They moved him now.
He's gone. Dippy's gone.
Well, that's because it's pronounced Diplodocus, but So they had this huge walrus. It was a taxidermied walrus that had been there since like 1836, made by an idiot. Because walruses have got all sorts of, natural folds and things in their skin. Taxidermists didn't know that, so he just stuffed this walrus.
Wow!
until it was taut. So it was this massive fucking walrus sitting there with taut skin all around. That couldn't fucking move.
You're saying, sympathetically, it was already dead at that point.
But
it's not like they've foie gras
They try and deliberately make them look alive, and so it's making me imagine if there was an actual walrus that stuffed.
But what I really liked about the Horniman Museum was it was obviously the museum's been there for some time, and it was in this purpose-built building. It's got carved on the outside. It's kind of the Horniman Museum written there, where the U is a V because that's how they museum, because that's how they did shit back in the day. But they had a lot of it was around natural history and evolution. It was all about natural history and evolution. But it was the version of evolution that predated genetics. So it was evolution by looking at comparative morphology, by going, look at the similarity between the structure in this animal and the structure of that animal, which was an interesting narrative way of seeing evolution explained, because that was the way it was explained. Like when Darwin pitched it, that's what he was doing, was looking at kind of comparative morphology. And then genetics came along and it was like, yeah, he was right. I'm like, oh, thank fuck for that. Because that could have blown the whole thing out the fucking water, but it didn't. So that was an interesting, different perspective. But as you went down the line, it was like, these are chimps and here are like Neanderthal skulls. And there was a bit in the exhibition where it says, and Neanderthals have been found in Dusseldorf. And it's like, is that a little dig at the Germans from your Victorian era museum? Was that just, let's have a crack at the Krauts. Why not? Let's just do that. Pip, pip, watto, topping, spiffing, what? But they had Homo erectus skulls there as well, and they ended up with kind of modern man. All the human specimens were labelled man.
Right,
because of course they were. And then man comes along. And then there was a case right at the very end when it said, different classes of man.
Whoa!
Which was completely empty. And I thought, that was the racist case then. That's what that was. The racist case.
It could have been like, here's a working class man, here's a middle class man. And what they had was they'd plasticised Ronnie Corbett, John Cleese.
And David Frost.
Exactly.
But it was brilliant trip. I really enjoyed it, and I'd recommend going to the Horniman Museum and seeing the overstuffed walrus and the racist case, because that was fabulous. What have you guys been doing?
Seem to be exclusively seeing shit films in the last couple of weeks.
Bad films. So, I mean, on Halloween, I thought it'd be a nice idea to have people around and we watch kind of some Halloween-y films.
Spooky films.
Yeah, and we weren't quite sure what to watch, so I kind of canvassed around for some opinions. I canvassed on Twitter for some opinions. People suggested several different things back. But you, Mike, decided to bring a film that you had seen a recommendation of, but hadn't seen the film. Knew nothing of.
Knew nothing about the film.
So what was the genesis of you getting this film?
So a few years ago, Mark Gatiss did a series of documentaries for BBC 4. He did a 3-part documentary called History of Horror.
Yeah.
And then a 2-part follow-up called Horror Europa. And one was about the history of horror movies, but primarily from the perspective of Western cinema. So it starts off with the Universal monster movies.
Which I think I've seen that. I think I saw that episode.
Yeah. It went to the British stuff, the Hammer in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then the Americans taking over again with things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween and in the 80s and into the 90s. And then he did a follow-up, which was Horror Europa, which was looking at European horror films.
Yeah.
So you had films like Zombie 2, which was, I think, was a quasi-sequel to Night of the Living Dead, because Night of the Living Dead turns out wasn't copyrighted, but due to an error. So, like, just random Italian directors were making sequels to it. Zombie 2 is also known as Zombie Flesh Eaters, and it's got this amazing sequence in it.
That's confusing, because that sounds like it's things that eat zombie flesh.
Yeah.
And so the heroes would be zombies going like, oh, stop
eating me.
Run away really slowly.
Zombie Flesh Eaters has got this amazing sequence in it where there's zombies on an island. So at the start of the film, there's zombies on an island, and about half hour in, people escape. And it's, thank God, we've managed to escape from the island, and the zombies can't get off the island. The zombies just walk along the seabed.
Yeah, like we will be after Brexit, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the twist, is like, of course the zombies can escape. So there's this sequence in the middle of the film where there's a zombie walking along the seabed, gets attacked by a shark, and you've got a fist fight between a zombie and a shark with a real actor in zombie makeup underwater with a real shark attacking him. And the guy playing the zombie is obviously holding his breath under there. He's not wearing a respirator. There's no bubbles coming off him. And they've shot this fight sequence between this stunt actor and a shark in between this guy holding his breath. It's like, that's an astonishing bit of filmmaking.
It's also almost certainly an astonishing bit of animal cruelty to make that work. That shark has almost certainly not been well treated.
But another film that he recommended was in Horror Europa was this film that he referred to as Manchester Morgue.
Yeah.
Which was a Spanish-Italian horror film. But apparently set, oddly enough, you'd think, set in Manchester.
Yeah, but
it was
not.
Actually set in Windermere.
Yeah, nowhere near Manchester, really.
But it was shot in Manchester and shot in Derbyshire. And I thought, well, we know Manchester really well. Alice knows Derbyshire really well. We might be able to spot some locations in this. And, there's Mark Gatiss saying, oh, this is really good and the zombies are really good in it, etc., etc., etc. So I thought, we'll get hold of this. We'll watch this film.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not watch this film?
Why not? It was awful.
I've been recommending so many people I know to watch it because it was amazingly terrible.
It featured... There are, especially in 70s films, there's an awful lot of kind of casual sexism. I would say this wasn't casual sexism. This was really professional sexism.
Yeah.
It was.
Like, he was going out of his way to be an absolute arse to the only woman in the entire film, basically.
Yeah. The lead character is possibly the most arrogant character of all fiction.
Yeah.
Literally of all time, the most arrogant character ever presented.
Yeah, and just the of all the things in a horror film to make people gasp, the thing that made us all gasp the most was the casual use of homophobic language.
Casual homophobia as well.
Whoa, you can't believe you just said that. You can't just drop that. That's awful. Yeah.
But it was a really odd film as well because it was English language.
Yeah.
But the lip sync was kind of weird. And it turns out this was really common in the 60s is you would effectively shoot a film silent and then dub the dialogue on over the top. They called it post-syncing. And there was they made 2 Doctor Who movies in the 60s. And one of them was called Doctor Who and the Daleks. The other one was Dalek Invasion Earth, 2150 AD. And in Doctor Who and the Daleks, there was a character in that, a Thal, who's a race of beautiful humanoids who live on the same planet as the Daleks do. And one of the Thal women, the actress who played her couldn't make the post-syncing session. So someone else dubbed her voice.
Okay.
So when you go to see the film, she's playing the part, but it's not her voice coming out. And she was interviewed years later going, it's really weird and she can't watch the film.
James L. Jones did.
Yeah. She can't watch the film because someone else's voice is coming out of her mouth and she finds that really weird. But that was really common back in the day to post-sync the film. So all the noise on the film is added in post-production, including all the dialogue. And actors would just stand in the studio lip-syncing to themselves, which is what they'd done in this film. Except none of the actors who did the voice were the actors who played the part.
Really?
But the actors who played the part were all Italian.
It's Spanish-Italian. Spanish or Italian.
They're Spanish-Italian actors speaking English and then getting dubbed by English actors afterwards. So presumably they were sitting there going, he's a zombie. But then getting dubbed over the top with a guy going, topping what? It's that zombie.
What I found particularly interesting about that, though, is that the English actors dubbing over the voices in English voice were not doing their own accents.
No.
They were putting on really bizarre accents
someone was
as
putting
well.
on a dodgy, like, Michael Caine-esque Cockney accent, like the main character, like, come on, lad, let's go over here. I'll do the driving. Exactly like that. Then you had, but it was also a village in what was meant to be near Manchester, where the lead detective was sort of Northern Irish with a hint of American. The sort of sergeant of the police force was Northern Irish. There was a Scottish one, and it's like they just kind of found random. They're like they'd said to someone, right, do an accent that isn't your own, and that's all the brief that the actors got until they went away and developed characters. Yeah. So that was an interesting
incredible.
film.
It was a magnificent film.
And
I really
bore no
enjoyed
relation to any zombie mythology ever. It made no sense. It didn't
I thought it made brilliant sense. I loved it.
What?
I thought that was fantastic. That they had this pest control device that they had that only worked on primitive nervous systems and drove them mad and made them attack each other. And that's what they were using it to wipe out the ants in the field. And so it was driving the ants crazy and attacking each other.
I don't know that you need to do that.
No.
I don't know why in farming you need to get rid of lots of ants. Like, if we have got any farmers listening, when it comes to pest
are
control,
ants a particular agricultural pest?
Need to get rid of those Windermere ants. They're fucking horrendous.
Yeah, I don't think ants would be that bothered by your crop. They wouldn't eat it because it's not sugary. It's not like sweet. So I just don't think they'd give a shit.
But then the idea in this film was that because this thing only worked on primitive nervous systems, and you got the scientist characters in it going, it doesn't affect people. It only works on primitive nervous systems. But it was making all the babies in the area want to kill people.
Violent, yes, yeah.
And the recently dead, where their nervous systems were breaking down, it was bringing them back to life and making them aggressive and wanting to kill people. And that was the logic. I like that. That was good.
Other members of the recently dead, they just had to smear, like a zombie had to smear blood on your eyes.
Oh, it's transmitted in the blood.
Is it why? It's transmitted in the blood, yeah. So that's a film that people should check out, but it's fucking terrible.
It was a brilliant film. I loved it.
It was incredible.
A film that people shouldn't check out, but is terrible, is Peterloo. We went to see that at the cinema. We won't go into too much detail, but it's about a massacre of people who were protesting in order to get the vote about 150 years ago in Manchester, and the government sort of slaughtered them all. It's that
the film exists is a good thing. It's a useful thing to have to make people more aware of this thing that happened in our not too distant history, but a lot of people aren't aware of.
Yeah, and normally you make a film with a camera rather than a sledgehammer. And they really did make this with a sledgehammer. So it was like, oh, here are all these... And so you just had a load of like northern working class people who were like common but without a gold. I don't have much of education, but I do know right from wrong, and this is wrong.
Okay.
What's happening now.
Yeah.
And all of the dialogue.
Apart from the soldier who was supposed to be suffering post-traumatic stress disorder and just ended up walking around the entire film looking gormless and confused by everything and not saying any words.
Yeah, he'd lost his gorm at the Battle of Waterloo. And he was just like, his PTSD was him squinting.
Yeah.
I was like, has he been like, has his eyesight been shot away? Is that what happened? He's lost his 20/20 vision in the war. But no, you had entire sequences of dialogue where it was Well, the government ain't doing us any favours, not with this taxation they've put on all grain. Is that the corn laws? It is the corn laws. And I think these corn laws aren't doing us any good and they should get rid of them. Well, the government's not going to get rid of those, not while they're making money. Well, the government's not going to do anything that's not going to make them money. They're not going to help us if it's going to cost them money. Not going to say, fuck me. Yeah, so do not see Peterloo.
It was painful. It was really painfully long.
So we've done that. And the other thing I've been doing, I've done a few sort of talks in a few places. I was in Glasgow earlier this week. While I was in Glasgow, Mike, I met a metronome.
An actual metronome.
An actual metronome. One of the people who played a metronome in the Metro Centre.
Listeners may not be familiar with, because we've talked about the metronomes on the show in the past, but listeners may not necessarily be familiar with what the fuck a metronome is. So this is the Metro Centre in Gateshead, which is near where both Marsh and I grew up.
Yeah, it was the big shopping mall in the area.
Massive. It was the biggest shopping centre in Europe at the time it was built. I don't know if it's been surpassed by something since then, but it was huge. But they had little mascots in there, which were the metronomes.
Yep.
Metrognomes, but then also metronome. But then you see what they did there. So you met someone who played...
They played a metronome.
A metronome.
She was one of the metronomes. She told me this very proudly. She was like, "Are you from like the Northeast?" Yeah. I was a metronome. I was like, I think she tells everybody, and nobody's ever
Nobody cares.
So
Nobody cares.
You've mentioned the metronomes to me before. I have now met a metronome.
So Doctor Who is midway through its run on Sunday evenings with Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor and new head writer Chris Chibnall.
I still haven't got round to watching any.
None of them.
Not even one.
It's a disgrace.
I downloaded a load onto the BBC iPlayer download app before I went to Australia with the intention of watching them, and then I got hooked on The Bodyguard instead, so I was watching that, and then I got hooked on The Haunting of Hill House, and then, now I'm hooked on the third season of Line of Duty, and I just haven't had chance to actually sit down and watch any Doctor Who.
Marsh, you seen any of the new series of Doctor Who?
No.
No?
Nah.
Well, it should be really obvious to anyone who has actually seen any of the show over the last few years that this season is a really big change in style and tone for the show. Genuinely huge change. Almost everything about the show has changed this season. And that's brilliant. That's what Doctor Who's always done. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why the show is so long-lived, is because it's got this ability to completely reinvent itself every few years, but still somehow be the same program. The series has had a bigger reinvention than most this season. So we've got a new Doctor, new companions, new TARDIS set, new TARDIS prop, new theme tune, new series composer, new writers, new directors, new producers, new cinematographers, new production designers. So the show's got a completely different visual style and tone about it than it's had recently. Literally the only person that I can think of off the top of my head who's still working on the show from the previous era is the casting director. The whole behind-the-scenes crew has changed. As well as the main cast. None of the main cast today are the main cast who were here this time last year.
Gotcha.
Like, none of them. In many ways, the new head writer, Chris Chibnall, has taken the series back to the basics of the format, with episodes alternating between futuristic and historical settings, which is what the programme did for its first few seasons under William Hartnell. Is you would have the an episode set in the past, then one in the future, then one in the past, then one in the future. The TARDIS has become more temperamental, so the Doctor originally couldn't steer the TARDIS at all, and they've not quite gone that far.
She's a woman, she can't drive.
which was the accusation that was levelled at it almost immediately, but so the Doctor's struggling to control the TARDIS again, so where they pop up in time and space is a bit of a mystery to the Doctor as much as to everybody else.
Which always makes for the most fun Doctor Who episodes when the TARDIS decides, no, we're going here.
There's nothing more boring than, we picked up a distress call and we've come to, fuck off. It's not fucking Star Trek. And the show's got 3 regular companions as well, which is, again, what the William Hartnell Doctor has. So there's a lot of inspiration drawn from those early years of the show in terms of what Chibnall is doing.
3 is quite a lot of them to be knocking about. Is there like bunk beds in the TARDIS? It's like, you have to share a room, I'm afraid, but you just having Billy Piper in it.
The show's also returned to its semi-educational remit. So when the series first started in 1963, the Doctor's visits to the past and the future were used as an excuse to teach viewers some science and some history. So 2 of the Doctor's companions, the original companions back in the 60s, was a science teacher and a history teacher, specifically for that reason. So they could be back in history, and the history teacher go, well, this is where, etc., etc., etc. And just, teach the viewers at home a little bit about science and a little bit about history. And this year the show's kind of gone back to that structure. So historical episodes are teaching viewers about the partition of India or the story of Rosa Parks. And the futuristic episodes, you've had a spaceship powered by antimatter generated in a particle accelerator, which the Doctor goes, oh, it's just like the one at CERN, followed by a potted lecture on how particle accelerators work and antimatter and so on and so forth. So I was quite surprised to see on Twitter a message from Jeremy Vine's Channel 5 show, which I think is the show that's taken over from The Right Stuff. I think it's the same thing. They're just calling it Vine on 5 now.
Okay.
Jeremy Vine's show on Channel 5.
I assume the show's only like 6 seconds long.
Was it 6 seconds of Vine? Was it?
I think it was
something like that. Something like that. They tweeted saying, has Doctor Who become too politically correct? Ratings have dropped, with fans complaining the storylines are too politically correct. Do you think that is the case?
Is any of that true? I thought ratings were through the roof.
Yeah, every word of this is complete garbage. Every word of this is garbage. Similar stories ran across the tabloid press in recent weeks. So The Sun wrote an article saying Doctor Who ratings plunge after Jodie Whittaker takes over with PC plots, which sounds like that's not the companion. The Mail said Doctor Who ratings dropped for 6.1 million for the latest episode, and that viewers were turning off because the programme was too PC for their liking, and the Daily Star joined the fray with a similar comment and all. So let's look at the factual basis of that. First off, are ratings for the show plunging? No. To claim that the ratings are plunging is misleading at best. The first episode of the series had 10.96 million viewers, which made it the most watched programme of the week, beating Strictly Come Dancing. It beat Great British Bake Off. It beat The Apprentice. It beat all the soaps. It was doing better than The Bodyguard. Everyone was banging on about The Bodyguard. Doctor Who got better viewing figures than The Bodyguard did. It was also the highest rated Doctor Who series opener since 1979.
Okay.
Beating out every season opener of the David Tennant era, for example, which is widely regarded as the high point of the modern series. But also everything that Chris Eccleston, Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi did. It was, it was huge.
Are they saying it's plunged as in it didn't reach that every episode?
Yes, basically. So following from that very strong start, the ratings for the show have dropped and are now sitting around the 7.5 to 8.5 million mark.
And where does 8 million sort of compare to Chris Eccleston and David Tennant?
Come to that.
Yeah.
So they've lost around 3 million viewers, which on the face of it might look bad, but it's actually completely normal. So
of course it's normal. People are like, oh, there's a new Doctor Who with a new Doctor. I'm going to see what's happening, even if I don't normally watch Doctor Who. And I'm not that interested in Doctor Who. I'm not going to keep watching it.
So for the first modern series of the programme, with Chris Eccleston, that opened with 10.8 million viewers and dropped to 8.5 million by the middle of the run. The first Matt Smith series did the same thing. Started at 10 million viewers, dropped to 8.5 by the middle of the run. This is totally par for the course for Doctor Who. You have a strong start to the series with a lot of accompanying press and publicity helping the show get out to new viewers. People tune in out of curiosity. Some of them stay with the programme, some of them don't. That's not a surprise. That's how that works. So to say ratings are plunging because of PC plots is just bollocks. There's nothing strange about the ratings for this season of Doctor Who compared to others. In fact, the mean rating for the season so far, so that the average number of viewers across the season, the mean viewing figure is the best the show has ever had in the modern run.
Which is because this series isn't finished yet, presumably. If there's a diminishing effect per episode.
Yes, I would be surprised if it dips substantially below that.
Okay.
It's doing really well. The mean viewing figure is we're 6 episodes into a 10-episode run at the moment, so there's not a lot to go, including a series finale still to go. I would be surprised if it dips substantially below this, but
presumably a Christmas special as well, and a Christmas special that's close to the actual run.
It's probably going to be a New Year special this year, from what they've told. But the Christmas special always does 12 to 13 million viewers. It's a huge deal, a Christmas special, which is why I'm not counting it when I'm talking about it's the best viewing figure in the series, because the holiday specials are always kind of a unique case. But the mean viewing figure for this season is better than anything that Eccleston, Tennant, Smith, or Capaldi have managed. If you leave aside the holiday specials, the ratings for Doctor Who are actually the strongest they have ever been in at least the last decade. Beyond that, we've got the complaints about plots being too politically correct or focused on social justice.
Doctor Who's always been politically correct, though. Like every Doctor I've watched in the modern season, he's a good guy.
Yeah. The show has certainly gone heavy on representation this year. So half the main cast are people of color. There's more women and minorities working behind the scenes on the show ever before, writing and directing for the program. We've had episodes set in post-colonial India. We've got characters with chronic disabilities, with invisible disabilities. There's been anti-corporate themes, episodes about time-traveling space racists trying to stop the civil rights movement. But far from this being some radical departure from silly corridor-based science fiction, this is what Doctor Who has always done. Doctor Who has always been doing this stuff. So, Isabel Watkins. Isabel Watkins was a character from a 1968 Doctor Who story called The Invasion, a self-described feminist who complains at being patronized by male characters and says, why are you being making bigoted anti-feminist remarks in 1968.
Yeah.
Sarah Jane Smith, who was companion to the third and fourth Doctor, also specifically written as a feminist and goes around advocating women's libs. She turns up in medieval England and starts encouraging the wenches in the kitchen to rise up against their male oppressors, like in 1974. This was 1973. In 1966, the black actor Earl Cameron was cast as an astronaut in a series called The 10th Planet, casting which was considered so unusual at the time that his agent was worried that they booked the wrong bloke. Not only was Cameron playing the astronaut, but he was actually playing the mission captain, and yet he still goes around going, I've played a fucking astronaut in Doctor Who, in 1966, because their idea of a black astronaut at the time was just, what? Never mind, he was the mission captain and was in charge of the white people. That was weird in the 60s, but Doctor Who was doing it. The Curse of Peladon is an allegory for British application to join the European community, ironically enough, and featured establishment figures in the Peladon government trying to sabotage the planet's application to join the Galactic Federation. There's no parallels with modern day that we can draw there at all. Its sequel, The Monster of Peladon, that was an allegory for the miners' strike. There was Doctor Who and the Silurians, which had themes of racism. The Green Death was about unchecked capitalism dumping toxic waste into the environment. The Sunmakers has got the Doctor inspiring a people's revolution on Pluto by quoting Karl Marx at an oppressed workforce. The Happiness Patrol has got the Doctor defeating an intergalactic version of Margaret Thatcher. The first producer of Doctor Who was a woman who was also the first female producer to work at the BBC. The first director of the show was a person of colour, also a gay man. The last producer of the original run of Doctor Who was also an openly gay man. The Rescue features a character who's a victim of gaslighting. The Savages is a critique of colonialism. Colony in Space is explicitly anti-capitalist and was written by a member of the British Communist Party. Paradise Towers features a critique of toxic masculinity. Remembrance of the Daleks has got racists teaming up with the Daleks. Silver Nemesis has got racists trying to team up with the Cybermen. Claws of Axos criticises petty nationalism, and the Macra Terror has got a colony of humans brainwashed by state propaganda. And that's without talking about the new series, where we've had interracial relationships, pansexual characters, polyamorous characters, black Time Lords, the first trans person to appear in the show, the first openly gay companion, lesbian reptiles in interspecies relationships with humans, gay Anglican Marines, and the Doctor literally punching a racist. Doctor Who has always been on the side of the marginalised and the oppressed in big ways and in small ways since the show began. So, in short, if you think Doctor Who's never been about social justice before, then you haven't really been paying attention.
So this week there was a article in the Times headlined, "Men and women really do think differently, says scientists." The article starts by saying, the much maligned but long-standing idea that women enjoy discussing their emotions while men are mostly excited by cars may be true after all.
I love that. I love that it's like women like discussing their feelings and men like cars.
Yes, yeah. Also, I don't know whether being excited by a car is in itself an emotion. I don't know whether excitement counts as emotion. So I don't know.
We're allowed to be excited by cars. We just can't discuss it with anybody else.
You can discuss cars, but not that you like them. What do you think of that car? Yes, it is a car.
It is a car.
I can tell you facts about it. Scientists conducting the world's largest study of sex differences in the brain found men were more likely to prefer things, in quote marks, and systems, while women were more interested in people and emotions. Men were almost twice as likely as women to be systems-oriented rather than empathetic and vice versa. We've seen these kind of claims plenty of times before, that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, or that men and women have fundamentally different brain structures. And these are claims that have often been treated with suspicion and skepticism, not least because the idea that there are these broad, hardwired and inflexible biological differences between men and women has been used to justify all manner of discriminations in lots of different directions throughout history, basically. Still, it's kind of worthwhile taking time to look at this specific study to see if it does actually tell us anything new and revelatory. If it does, great.
Sure.
After all, as the Times reports, the researchers say that their results have confirmed two theories. First, that the empathizing, systemizing theory of sex differences, which predicts that at a population level, men will be more excited by coding, for instance, while women will be more attuned to feelings. Is what how the Times reports it.
I mean, I bloody love coding.
Yeah. And Alice, how do you feel about feelings?
I don't really have any feelings about feelings.
You're too busy having feelings about other things to have feelings about feelings. And the second theory that the researchers say this actually confirms is the extreme male brain theory, which predicts that the brains of autistic people are more masculine than is typical for their sex, in that they are more systems focused. And this is what the studies, as reported by the Times, are actually sort of proving, apparently. So what is this study? Well, the study it's from scientists at Cambridge University. It's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in the PENUS. Always good to get your male brains, female brain study published in PENUS.
As I'm going around London, every time the tube was going to Cockfosters, I was creased. I couldn't get over that.
I was in Edinburgh recently. I walked up Cockburn Street. Still good. So this study was called Testing Empathizing, Systemizing Theory of Sex Differences and the Extreme Male Brain Theory of Autism in 500,000 people. So the first thing to note here is the numbers. They're really strong. 500,000. In fact, more than 500,000. The study actually involved 695,166 participants.
So N equals 695 million.
Sorry, 695,000.
Sorry, yes.
695 million would be really very persuasive.
That is a robust study there.
Our study managed to take in 10% of the global population. So 695,000 participants. But from the way that they had from the participants, there were some who hadn't specified a gender or who had listed their gender as others, so they took those out because they just wanted to look at identified males, identified females. So they were left with 672,000 participants. Then they took all the people who fell outside of an age range that they defined of interest for the study, which was 16 to 89, because they wanted to get rid of kids, basically.
Okay.
Or anybody who didn't give you their age, so you couldn't tell that they were in that age range, which left 671,606 participants.
Right.
So those are pretty powerful numbers still. So far, that's great. So far, so good. But as for backing up the paper's claim that the differences between genders was very clear, and that's in quote marks, that's exactly what the paper specifically says, the data appears, reading it through, to actually bear that out. For example, 44.4% of men who were not identified as autistic were categorized as having a type S or extreme type S brain, which means they scored higher in the systemizing side of things than in empathizing in terms of the questions they're asked, compared to 27.3% of women. And the professor of the study, Simon Baron-Cohen, has previously dubbed type S or systemizing the male brain. So he said,
right.
But it's not. But even then, from that's not majority of men.
No, 44.4% of men have a male brain.
Yeah.
In their terminology.
In the terminology of, if you score highly on this factor, the professor in charge of the study has said that means you have a male brain, and therefore 44.4% of men have a male brain. At the same time, 42.9% of non-autistic women had a type E brain, scoring higher on empathy than systemizing, compared with 24.6% of men. So 42.9 women were type E rather than 24.6% of men. And Professor Simon Baron-Cohen called the type E brain the female brain. And then the remainder of non-autistic participants had a type B or balanced brain. So everybody who didn't fall into an E or an S was a B for balanced. And then when you look at the autistic participants, which they are also looking at, 62.4%.
Well, sorry. So you say everybody who wasn't... What percentage of women had an S brain?
It was 27.3% of women had an S brain, 42.9% of women had an E brain,
and the rest were B.
And the rest were Bs. So you're looking at about sort of 30-ish% of women were balanced. And when it came to men, it was similar. So 44% of men were an S, 25% of men were a B, 25% of men were E, and therefore it's again about 30% of men were B.
So it's roughly 30-30-30 with a slight skew in each gender.
Yeah, there's a 10% skew in one direction or another, depending on your gender, basically. Yeah.
Sounds like two overlapping bell curves to me at the moment.
That's exactly how they portray it in the diagrams attached to this study, in fact. And then you have the second question, which was whether people who are autistic are more likely to have a hyper male brain. Well, 62.4% of men were categorized as type S or an extreme type S, and 46.8% of autistic women were type S, which compared to 13% of autistic men and 23% of autistic women who were type E or extreme type E, which this study then says, meaning autistic people were much more likely than non-autistic people of their gender to have masculine brain traits. So that might sound pretty robust then. Men and women have different brain types, and the brain traits most closely associated with male brains are also most commonly found among people with autism. So where's the rub here, if indeed there is one? Well, for one thing, it's worth noting that while this study makes broad claims about brain types, this study did not actually look at anybody's brain.
No, this is all personality.
No brains were harmed during the making of this study. This wasn't a study that found 500,000 brains and then went poking about in them, neither physically nor using fMRI scans. This was a study that queried an existing data set and looked for patterns. So where would that data set have come from of 600,000 plus people who are filling in these kind of these studies? Well, according to the study, in spring 2017, Channel 4 TV developed a website for a documentary later entitled Are You Autistic? As part of this website, users were able to take several scientific measures and find out how their scores compared with the general population. Participants were asked to provide demographic information and asked to click a checkbox indicating that they would allow their research to be used for scientific research. Only the results of those who checked the checkbox were then recorded for the dataset. So it might be that all of the scientific measures put to these respondents were very legitimate, highly scientific. But the data gathering is far from ideal here.
You've selected Channel 4 watchers who are interested in a program about autism who want to take a quiz to find out if they're autistic.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So there is a very heavy self-selection effect at play here. So are people who respond to a TV show about autism likely to be representative of the general population, or is it likely to be skewed towards people who might have either cause to suspect that they're autistic or might have already had a diagnosis of being autistic or something in that kind of area?
Well, they're talking about male brains and female brains, but what they're examining are people's personality types. They're not talking about the any actual physical structure.
Yeah.
There's going to be an element of both nature and nurture going on here, but there's nothing here that couldn't be explained by nurture. Well, basically, that it's being raised in a culture.
We'll come to all of that.
Okay.
So that's one issue with the data set. There's a self-selection here, is that there are people who are going to be watching that TV program and people who are going to be interested in a question about whether they're autistic or not. There's another unusual aspect of the data here too, which I think is worth remarking on, though I don't know how much of an effect it would actually have had. But of those who indicated their sex, 259,000, or 39% of the data set, were male, and 412,000, or 61% of the data set, was female. So it feels less than ideal here that this study included 2/3 of the number of men than it did women, though it's very hard to argue that this had a particular clear or concrete effect on the outcome. But it's interesting to note that I would have thought that a TV show that was all about Are You Autistic might have had more men answering that question, because society has this assumption that men are more likely to be autistic, and that indeed autistic people are more likely to have male brains. I think there was already an assumption in society. Now, it might also be that you have the opposite skewing effect, that women are more likely to be sort of self-referential or introspective about questions about the makeup of their brain than men are either, and are more likely to seek out these kind of questionnaires. So we have some interesting sort of skews going on here. But as you've sort of alluded to there here, Mike, perhaps the most problematic thing about this entire study is that it was indeed based on a self-reported questionnaire, conducted as well, not even under formal conditions, but as an accompaniment to essentially a piece of entertainment.
Yes.
So this isn't even like you got people into a lab and were able to control the environment under which that they were asking these questions, or control the additional information that they had to shape or anchor or skew their effect. their answers could well have been either indicated by the content of the show, although I think it could have been because their answers formed the content of the show rather the other way. But certainly their answers would have been influenced by the Associated Press release and the press coverage and whatever other material led them to asking that. And that could have an angry effect.
Completely primed, aren't they?
There's a heavy kind of priming thing. So when you bear that priming in mind, here are 20 of the questions that they were asked. So the 10 that were whose scores would indicate a systemizing quotient. Some of those questions were: when I learn about a new category, I like to go into detail to understand the small differences between different members of that category. Is that strongly agree, slightly disagree, or
new
strongly disagree?
Category of what?
It doesn't say.
Okay.
Just a new category.
I mean, what if you don't give a shit about that category?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to look at the details of a new category of butterfly because I'm not particularly interested in butterflies.
Yeah, exactly. I have the question: when I'm in a plane, I do not think about aerodynamics.
No, I don't.
No, well, there you go.
No,
I am. If you strongly disagree with that, so if you always think about aerodynamics, then that has you much more likely to have a systemizing effect.
Okay.
If you disagree with it, you score 0 on a systemizing effect here.
What if you just have flight anxiety and you're thinking about the aerodynamics because you're thinking about the likelihood of...
It's worth bearing in mind. So, of these 20 questions, what they do is they tot up your score on the systemizing questions and tot up your score on the empathy questions. Mm-hmm. So, it's not like if you score a 0 on the plain one, it goes against you being systemizing. It just doesn't go for you being systemizing.
Yes, I see.
So, things like I'm interested in knowing the path a river takes from its source to the sea.
Don't care.
When traveling by a train, I often wonder exactly how the rail networks are coordinated.
Nope.
When I hear a weather forecast, I am not very interested in the meteorological patterns.
No, probably not.
Yeah, I enjoy looking through the catalogues of products to see the details of each product and how it compares to others.
Yeah,
sometimes. Is the systemizing thing?
Who does that?
Sometimes I might do that.
Mike does. Mike obviously does.
Sometimes I might have a go at that.
But again, it depends on the catalogue of products.
For things you don't even want to buy.
No, only for shit that I'm interested in.
It's stuff that you want to buy, I can understand. Like, if you are... but that's not going through a product catalogue and looking at differences between products. That's deciding on the best out of a selection of products.
Yeah, but then, when the Christmas Argos catalogue came out, I just have a quick...
Everyone looks through the Christmas Argos.
Yeah, I flick through product catalogues, but I don't compare products to each other and see how they differ.
Well, when I look at a mountain, I think precisely about how it was formed. When I look at a piece of furniture, I do not notice the details of how it was constructed, which is, I think some of these are, these may well be very genuinely well-accepted scientific tests, When I learn a language, I become intrigued by its grammatical rules, which I don't know that you can learn a language without becoming intrigued by its grammatical rules. I would argue if you're not intrigued by its grammatical rules, you're not learning a language, really. You're reciting a language, but you're not really learning it. And when I listen to a piece of music, I always notice the way it's structured. Those are the 10 questions that would score you points one way or another, or the questions going one. Your answers to one degree or another would score you points in the systemizing. And then you have the empathy quotient. So I am good at predicting how someone would feel. Someone will feel, rather. Other people tell me I'm good at understanding how they are feeling and what they are thinking. And I think that's an interesting question. That one I think is worth sort of coming back to in terms of what this actually is necessarily showing, or what this could be influenced by. It's hard for me to see why some things upset people so much. Another question: I can easily work out what another person might want to talk about. I can't always see why someone should feel offended by a remark. I can tune into how someone feels quite rapidly and intuitively. Often people say that I'm insensitive, though I don't see why. In a conversation, I tend to focus on my own thoughts rather than what my listener might be thinking. Friends usually talk to me about their problems and say I'm very understanding, and I find it hard to know what to do in a social situation. Yeah. So those are all the different questions, okay, Mike? So I think you understand where your questions are going here. But these questions seem, for me, far from ideal because they fail to address whether men and women truly have different brains and different ways of thinking, or whether society encourages men and women to see themselves and reflect on themselves in different ways. Yeah. So, for example, looking at that, other people tell me I'm good at understanding how they are feeling and what they are thinking. That could either say that I'm genuinely good at that, or that the people I'm talking to and the society I move within is used to telling people of my gender that they're good at understanding empathy. So if you live in a world where empathy is more ascribed to one gender or another, then your answer in that question is going to indicate your movement in that society and not actually what you're good at. And I think this is kind of key when it says I can tune into how someone else feels rapidly and intuitively. I think you're more likely to answer yes to that if you're of the gender that society has said you're meant to be very empathetic, and also B, over the course of your life you're going to have taken on those messages and perhaps even change the way that you interact with people to internalize that as a set of instructions about how society indicates it.
Yeah.
So how do we distinguish between a world where men and women have biologically different modes of thinking that are hardwired and physiological, and a world where we socialize men with the idea that they're systematic thinkers and we socialize women to be empathetic? What's the effect of that training in the latter world on the way people reflect on situations and problems and the way they view themselves? And how do you tease that apart from tease one apart from the other, especially using a questionnaire associated with a TV show and a sample set of people who were responding to a questionnaire associated with a TV show?
What we need to do is get 600,000 babies.
Yes.
Split them into two groups.
Yes.
I give them no social interaction whatsoever until they are old enough to fill out a survey.
Yeah.
And then get them to fill out the survey and see what the differences are.
I think we need to ban you from ideas that start with "we need to get 600,000 babies." So Dean Burnett, the neuroscientist and writer, actually wrote some of his criticisms of this study for the Cosmic Shambles Science blog. And in it, he explained, I'll use his words here, he said, "A lot has been made about the size of the study. Over 600,000 participants is pretty impressive, and it will undoubtedly yield a lot of information to work with. But this information is only as useful as the method used to collect it. And if those are limited in scope and application, then any conclusions are going to be limited." Basically, he says, even if you've got as many as 100 million men and women to toss a coin, you couldn't then use that data to show that one sex is better with financial issues. He said a much more realistic explanation is that we live in a society with a strong gender divide, which is reinforced from day one. So all the adults in the study have developed in such a context and unavoidably internalized to varying degrees many of these cultural norms, i.e. women report being emotional because they're so often told by the world that they're supposed to be, despite the evidence showing that this is bollocks. This also further highlights how the vast size of the study is limited in use, and it doesn't automatically make the findings more valid. He said, if I were to run a study 10 times this size in, say, India, and then I were to declare that everybody has a Hindu brain, I'd be laughed out of the room. So Simon Baron-Cohen, the Cambridge scientist who's behind this study, is responsible, actually, as it turns out, for coming up with both the empathizing, systemizing theory of brain function and the extreme male brain theory of autism. So it does seem significant that the press coverage of his study is filled with the claims that this study provides clear evidence to support both of his theories. This is effectively man who has theory finds evidence that his theory is right in a data set that could say something else if your theory was something else. I suspect if your theory was empathizing and systemizing is entirely coded through social interaction and societal structure, you could get this out of here too and say, you see, these women who are 40 years old and have had 35, 40 years of consciously having society tell them how to be, do score highly on this kind of measure. So unfortunately, this kind of study doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the issues with it are therefore not without consequence. These theories, as the Times points out, have previously been described as neurosexism, and they're pounced on by the kind of people who want to use science to push their own agenda and ideology on what is and what is not hard-coded in gender. One of those people, for example, is James Damore, who was the guy who used to work for Google before he was fired for publishing a manifesto which suggested that women had less natural interest or aptitude for coding, despite, as Dean Burnett pointed out, that women invented coding. And that programs to encourage, and that therefore programs that encourage women to code were liable to fall foul of biology and fail for that reason. Damore cited the empathizing, systemizing theory in that manifesto as proof.
Oh, did he?
He's now fallen on such hard times since being sacked by Google that he's been described by The Spectator as one of the heroes of the intellectual dark web. These are theories that have knock-on consequences and influence people. There are plenty of other people, in fact, right now, across political divides and within various positions on gender issues, who need absolutely no encouragement to turn to science in order to justify their belief in the innate and immutable biological gender differences. The Times article, written by Tom Whipple, who's a very solid and reliable science journalist. We work with him at Good Thinking. He's very good. He's very good on lots of things. The article did at least point out that researchers have highlighted it was not apparent to what extent they were down to the changes they found were down to inherited characteristics or socialization. But this was way down the article and way, way far from the headline and that initial claim about men being excited by cars. The article pointed out that the authors stressed that the differences observed in the study apply only to group averages and not to individuals. And the authors say that to make inferences based on gender, autism diagnosis, or occupation would constitute stereotyping and discrimination with which they strongly disagree. And then you have the autism aspect. I'm not sure how helpful it is to categorize autism as extreme male brainness in a world where autism is already underreported and undiagnosed in women, because we have the existing assumption and stereotype that autism is something that boys get and not girls. So in conclusion, I don't think this study can really show that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. I think there's a lot more going on here that this study cannot get to.
So before our ratings start to plummet through excessive political correctness,
our ratings are as high as they've ever been, Mike.
Focus on social justice. Last week, the New York Times magazine ran an article titled, "What if the placebo effect isn't a trick?"
You're right, because the way we'll get those listeners back is to talk about placebo now, Mike.
Quite right, too. Some good hard science from a web developer. Now, maybe it's my bias speaking here, but it's interesting how many of these articles on the placebo effect within the popular press go in with this narrative which assumes that the reader thinks the placebo effect is bollocks.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've never met anybody who thinks the placebo
Yeah.
effect is bollocks.
Just anecdotally, the common perception of the placebo effect seems to be that it's a real powerful therapeutic effect. Maybe those are just the kind of people that I talk to. But articles like
my
this...
experience is everybody believes in the placebo effect. Just different groups of people have a different definition of what that is.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
a lot of academics I know think, well, what's the point in debunking the placebo effect? It's a real thing. It's just bias. It's just...
Yeah.
Whereas non-scientists will say, it's magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Articles like this are so often pitched as if they have to persuade a skeptical reader that the placebo effect is a real thing. Unless they're writing these articles specifically for me now.
I think
That's a possibility as well.
Well, they know that if they write the article specifically for you, you'll be sent it by like 50 people in a day.
Which, as I was with this one.
Yeah.
So this was a long article. It covered an awful lot of ground. An awful lot of it was also completely irrelevant. There's 8 paragraphs on mesmerism, for example.
I saw that,
in the middle, which the author oddly insists is the origin of skepticism about placebo effects for reasons which are deeply unclear. It's just, and because that's why people are suspicious. No, what are you talking about?
I hate when people have an idea about something and then present it as if it's a fact.
The bulk of the article is an examination of the work of our friend Ted Kapchuk, the former acupuncturist and traditional Chinese medicine practitioner who has now managed to inveigle his way into Harvard Medical School, where he is the director of their program in placebo studies, or to give it its full title, the Program in Placebo Studies and the Therapeutic Encounter. Ooh.
Nice.
This despite the fact that Kapchuk does not have a medical degree and his doctorate is in Oriental medicine.
Yeah. Which does get mentioned in that article, but it gets mentioned very sort of low down that article and glossed over as if that doesn't have any impact on anything.
Fine. Yeah. Kapchuk gave the keynote address at a conference for the Society for Interdisciplinary Placebo Studies in the Netherlands last year, where this article claimed he told the assembled audience that there was no placebo effect, which sounds good at first blush, except that this was actually a rhetorical flourish. From the New York Times, they said, the topic he and his colleagues studied was created by the scientific establishment only in order to exclude it, which means they are always playing on hostile terrain. So Kapchuk is now at the point where he is rejecting the placebo effect in name only, apparently because it was only created by doctors in order to exclude it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, sort of right, maybe, but it's entirely a point of rhetoric rather than fact.
And it's also, it's hard to say that he's operating on hostile terrain when we keep seeing articles everywhere like, have you seen how amazing the placebo effect is?
Yes.
I think we should be doing more on the placebo effect.
Citing Kapchuk and his work specifically.
Constantly, yeah.
The article goes on to be a puff piece, to be honest, uncritically reporting the work of Kapchuk and his colleague Catherine Hall, who appeared on Adam Ruins Everything, who here enthuses about how acupuncture cured her carpal tunnel syndrome. However, there are a few specific claims made about specific studies, so I wanted to take a look at those. First, the article claims... Give people a sugar pill, and those patients, especially if they have one of the chronic stress-related conditions that register the strongest placebo effects, and if the treatment is delivered by someone with whom they have confidence, give people a sugar pill, and those patients will improve. quite non-specific as claims go, so tricky to address directly. But the fundamental error made here, as ever is the case with reporting on placebo effects, is that objective effects and reported effects are conflated. Give people a sugar pill and patients may report an improvement, which is not necessarily the same thing as a genuine, actual, real improvement. And in cases where we are able to measure a real objective improvement, the sham interventions actually don't do anything more than no treatment. They also say, wake a patient from surgery and tell him you've done an arthroscopic repair and his knee gets better, even if all you did was knock him out and put a couple of incisions in his skin. This is, of course, the knee surgery study that we've talked about dozens of times.
Yeah.
The study which doesn't prove that placebos are good for osteoarthritis of the knee. It proves that surgery is not good for osteoarthritis of the knee. Give a drug a fancy name and it works better than if you don't. Again, no reference supplied for any of these. I assume they're talking here about the branded aspirin study, which was a self-reported endpoint, so prone to biased reporting. And for more information on that, see episode 188. But they then have something more specific, which we have not talked about before. They say, tell someone a normal milkshake is a diet beverage and his gut will respond as if the drink were low fat.
What?
So,
how does your gut respond differently to a low-fat drink than a non-low-fat drink?
I wish I knew.
Like, is the difference between if there isn't no identified difference between how your gut responds to a low-fat or a non-low-fat drink?
Yeah.
Then how can you then look at
the differences,
manipulating that response that you've not even proven exists yet?
This is a study I was peripherally aware of, but I hadn't actually read it properly yet, so I thought this was a good excuse to read it. This paper was titled Mind Over Milkshakes.
Nice.
And was published in the journal Health Psychology, which is from the American Psychological Association. The first thing I noticed about this study, aside from its daft title, was the lead author, who is Alia Crum. Crum was the author of an earlier study called Mindset Matters, which is a study cited in Bad Science. This was the study which claimed that hotel room attendants lose more weight when you tell them that cleaning rooms counts as good exercise, even if they don't clean any more rooms.
And that study was really bad, wasn't it?
It was. The outcome measure for this study was whether the room attendants were doing any more exercise, which they discovered by asking their boss if they were working any harder. And also a later replication of this study showed that there was no effect. Unperturbed by the replication failing to support her study, however, Crum is back and looking at the power of the mind over the milkshake. 46 people. So
46.
not quite 671,000.
It's not.
46 people, so small numbers, were recruited into this study. 65% of them were women, so I'm unsure why the New York Times decided to use male pronouns to describe their model participant when they talked about his gut will respond as if the drink were low fat. But 65% of them were women. 78% of them were students, because, of course, all psychology research is done with students.
Yeah. In fairness, the New York Times, they just might have wanted to avoid putting female pronouns in a story that was about low-fat diet drinks and
could have used gender-neutral pronouns and just avoided the whole fucking problem, couldn't they?
It's probably a style book thing.
Participants were told that they were going to try a new milkshake, which was being developed at Yale. They were going to taste...
Science milkshake.
Why are they developing a milkshake at Yale?
Developing milkshakes at Yale. They were going to taste a milkshake today and then come back in a week and taste a second milkshake. One milkshake was very indulgent, very tasty, high fat, high sugar, etc. Delicious, very,
so they were told.
Very rich.
Why are Yale developing a very rich, unhealthy, indulgent milkshake?
Yeah.
The second milkshake is low fat, low calorie, much more sensible.
Yeah.
And the participants were told that the researchers wanted to know, one, if they could tell the milkshakes apart by taste. Spoilers, they couldn't.
No.
But they had to taste them a week apart.
But they had to wait to taste them a week apart. And two, what effect the milkshake has on their bodies. Right? So that
milkshake.
This milkshake, what effect it is having on their bodies.
They had one milkshake.
One milkshake, a week apart.
What effect did it have on your body? Okay.
So, after an overnight fast, participants arrived for the study. They were fitted with an intravenous catheter so that blood could be taken. And then 20 minutes after they arrived, the first blood sample was collected to use as the baseline, to establish the baseline. So
but their baseline
yes.
was in fasted
Was
humans.
fasted, yes.
Which isn't a true baseline.
Well,
because most humans don't fast.
but it could
That's
be a baseline for this particular study, as long as they take it the same next time as well.
Yes,
And I've
it's
got
fine for some consistency, but it's not.
I've got a little more on that baseline as well.
Okay.
If we come to that, we'll see.
So
But
we might drop the baseline.
I'm not sure it tells you something relevant about humans living normal lives and drinking milkshakes.
Yes, that's probably fair to say. So the first blood sample was collected 20 minutes in so they've not had a milkshake at this point, just 20 minutes in, we'll take your first blood sample, that's your baseline. They were then given the bottle of milkshake. Here's your milkshake, this is the milkshake you're going to have. On the bottle was a label which identified it as an indulgent high-calorie milkshake or a healthy, sensible, low-calorie milkshake. In fact, of course, the milkshakes are identical, because of course they are.
It's like a Yazoo.
The only thing that differed here was a label. 60 minutes after their arrival, so 40 minutes after having been given the bottle of milkshake, blood was taken again. And after blood was taken, it was like, right, now drink the milkshake. Right? So what they're looking at is the effect of the anticipation of this is the milkshake you're going to have. Oh, yeah. I'm excited. I'm getting a milkshake. Oh, getting some milkshake.
I would not want to have been part of this study. Are you allowed to do anything else while you're sitting with a milkshake for 20 minutes?
Yes, you have to watch There Will Be Blood. And you can only drink the milkshake when you get to the bit in the film where he starts yelling about drinking a milkshake.
So
you've not seen that film? Okay, good.
40 minutes after they were handed the bottle of milkshake, blood was taken again, and then they were told to drink the milkshake. You have to drink the milkshake, you have to drink the whole milkshake, and you've got to do it within 10 minutes.
But the milkshake.
Which they did.
Okay.
So within 10 minutes, they drank the milkshake. 90 minutes after the arrival, so that's at least 20 minutes after having finished the milkshake, they then took some more blood.
But plus minus 9 minutes.
Plus or minus 9 minutes, because someone could have gone clang, or what someone could have done. So, but it's at least 20 minutes after having finished the milkshake.
Yeah, so 20 minutes after you finish the milkshake, yards full of boys.
They take blood again, so that's the third sample of blood taken, and then they were allowed to go home. So that's 3 blood samples taken. One when they arrive, 1 40 minutes after finding out what milkshake they're having, and 1 20 minutes after having had the milkshake.
Did it say what flavour the milkshake was?
Vanilla.
Boring milkshake. This would also be a great way of testing what happens to your body when you take 3 samples of blood for an hour and a half.
I'm sure it wasn't like a pint, though. It's not like they're taking 3 pints of blood.
But your body does respond to that. Like, of course your body responds to having blood taken.
But it might only be a little bit. Like a cup.
Just a glass. A glass of blood.
The action of taking blood stimulates your body in lots of different ways. I'm not just talking about the amount of blood it's lost, but also the fact that you're introducing a wound to the body, that you're applying a certain type of pressure. Like, lots of things are changing.
And they have an intravenous catheter fitted for the duration of this, so people have got this fucking thing sticking out their arms.
Which might be why they wait 20 minutes before they take the first.
Then that's why they do have the initial 20-minute to get you, and also to make sure that changing position isn't going to change anything.
Certainly,
so they want you sat down and relaxed. Yeah.
So a week later, the participants were asked to return. They went through the same procedure again, except this time they were given the other milkshake. Again, the milkshakes are identical. The only thing which differed were the labels. But if you had the indulgent milkshake the first time, you were given the sensible one this time, and vice versa. So everyone had both milkshakes. Again, milkshakes are the same. The only thing that's different is the labels here. And then the blood was analysed for ghrelin levels. So what's ghrelin? Ghrelin is commonly called the hunger hormone. It is responsible for the regulation of appetite. On an empty stomach, ghrelin is secreted, promoting feelings of hunger. When your stomach is full, ghrelin secretion stops and you stop feeling hungry.
Okay.
That's how ghrelin works, in a nutshell.
We're not entirely sure about, how exactly it works.
No, and there's an interaction with leptin as well, which is the satiation hormone as well, and obviously those are kind of two sides of the same coin. But so there's an interaction there as well. But they weren't looking at leptin here; they were only looking at ghrelin. What they found was that patients who had seen the indulgent label secreted more ghrelin in the run-up to having the milkshake, and the same people had ghrelin drop off faster after having consumed the milkshake, even though the milkshakes were exactly the same. So when you were getting an indulgent milkshake, you secreted more ghrelin. You were like, oh, I'm so hungry for this fucking milkshake because it's all fat and sugar. So you secreted more ghrelin. Then after you'd had it, your ghrelin levels dropped significantly. Whereas if you had the sensible milkshake, you didn't have as high a peak or as high a trough.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I can see sort of where this is going, but this just feels more like the effect of expectation on appetite.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Like, oh, that
I'm
burger...
also not sure about psychologists doing biochemistry to check ghrelin levels.
And I've got concerns on that as well.
Yeah. But it's like, you're going to have a really lovely hamburger, or you're going to have like an Asda Smart Price straight out of a tin hamburger.
Yeah.
One of those I'm going to get more excited about than the other and have more anticipation for.
So I'd asked Alice about this yesterday, where I'd said, is there a known association between anticipation of food and ghrelin? I had found a study which says that there is, but N equals 8.
Okay.
And it's like, I don't fucking trust that. 8 fucking people. And your answer was kind of, we don't know.
Yeah, basically. I think there's probably some biological plausibility, like hormones change. Hormones are one of the things that might change in response to brain changes or thought processes or whatever, but it's never been. I don't think it's ever been conclusively shown for ghrelin.
Oddly, this study does kind of support the idea that you secrete more ghrelin in anticipation of having a tasty meal.
But it's also important to consider where ghrelin's made, how it's produced. Like, it's made in the gut.
Yes.
And we think it's made in response to stretch receptors. So you have stretch receptors in your gut. So when they're relaxed, you release ghrelin, and when they're stretched,
you don't.
You reduce the release of ghrelin. So that doesn't seem to go.
Which is one of the reasons why they made people fast first. So they were definitely on an empty stomach when they turned up for the study. So they should not have been secreting ghrelin before they got into the study. But then they started.
They should have been secreting ghrelin.
Sorry, yes, they should have been. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I got that backwards. But yes.
But then, but then they're taking in a milkshake. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's not going to stretch your stomach that much.
Indeed. From the conclusion of the paper, it says the mindset of indulgence produced a dramatically steeper decline in ghrelin after consuming the shake. So that's what the study concludes.
Okay.
That a dramatically steeper decline in ghrelin.
You've emphasised dramatically there, and I think that's for a reason.
Dramatically.
Okay.
So what are the issues with this study? First, I want to call out the powerfully misleading graph that's in this paper. Let me show you this graph. So two things to note on this graph to me. First, there are no error bars. Even though the only other chart in this paper does have error bars, there are no error bars on this graph at all.
It's very odd that they don't have error bars there. It makes me think that this is the recording for one individual patient.
Sure, I could see that. I mean, they don't
say one way or the other. They don't say like
and this is the hero chart. This is the big one that shows the results.
And the figure legend for it just says this is the recordings we have. It's not the recordings of who, how many people, n equals whatever. It's just
it makes me suspicious that the error bars were removed because if they'd been shown, it would have undermined the conclusion. Because the error bars would have overlapped.
Yeah,
slightly more cynical outlook than mine. I think
that's what it makes me worry about.
It also suffers, which is understandable in many places, but it does skew the effect size in that it suffers from not sort of finishing off the y-axis. So that is my
next point. The next point I've got down here is that the y-axis runs from 180 picograms per milliliter of
880
of ghrelin. Sorry, 880 picograms per milliliter of ghrelin to 960 picograms per milliliter of ghrelin. So that's a range of just 80 picograms, and the variation in ghrelin between the two groups is 20 to 30 picograms at its peak. If they had drawn this graph at full scale, it would have been obvious how minuscule the actual difference in effect size is between the two groups.
I know you've looked at this and you'll come onto it, but I don't know what the range of ghrelin is, whether you only need a 20 picogram per mil change in ghrelin in order to see a difference.
Well, that's my very next point, actually. According to the website of the Mayo Clinic, normal ghrelin levels are between 520 and 700 picograms per milliliter of blood.
So this is skewed high already.
So the baseline of this study...
They were fasting.
I'll come to that as well. The baseline in this study is 920 picograms per milliliter, which should be ringing alarm bells. That's way outside of clinical norms.
Yeah,
way outside of what the reported clinical norm is, 500 to 700 picograms per milliliter. So
it's the entire range out. So if the range is 500 to 700, that's a 200 range. So add 200 on here, you're still at 900. So it's above the range.
That raises questions about maybe some methodological problems in this study. Are they sure that they're measuring ghrelin? Are they measuring it correctly, etc.? Now, there is a study that looks at the effect of fasting on ghrelin. Because I thought, well, maybe because it's overnight, the ghrelin's built up and up and up and up and up and up and up, and that's why they started off at like a massive peak. Turns out ghrelin doesn't do that. Ghrelin's got a half-life of a couple of hours. So you release it, it builds up and up and up, and then tails off again.
And then you need to make and release more.
Yeah, 2 hours after you've started feeling hungry, you stop feeling hungry again, which is something I'm sure we've all experienced. If you get so hungry, you stop being hungry again. That's because the ghrelin does not build up. It kind of waxes and wanes, but it doesn't build up and peak in the way that this seems to have done.
It makes me as you kind of alluded to it, that there's either something wrong with their test, or they've got some very weird people. If they're that far out of normal range.
Oh, this is a person.
It might be. I suspect it might be one. That might be the readings for one person, and one person might have a different. People can fluctuate.
But that's a deeply misleading chart as well. If that's what they've done.
Yeah.
And not only that, but the so-called normal range from the Mayo Clinic, and I'm wary about using published norms as a baseline. It's not really the thing you should do. But the range on that Mayo Clinic is 180 picograms per milliliter. So normal range varies by 180 picograms per milliliter. The effect size here is 20 to 30 milligrams, an order of magnitude smaller than the normal variation that you would get in ghrelin levels.
Or we could just be looking at noise in the data.
Yeah.
Even the difference between baseline and then the apparent reduction is only 30 picograms?
Yes. Yeah. There's barely any difference there at all.
I think on the indulgent one, the Sensi Shake one is pretty much level.
The Sensi Shake one goes,
it's basically level.
That's a straight line.
And when David Gorski looks at this paper for Science-Based Medicine, he said the difference between the indulgent and the sensible shake is about 2% difference between the lines measured there. But is this a statistically significant effect? In fairness to Crum, yes, it is. Just about. So the paper says that the post-consumptive interactions, that's the difference in the drop-off of ghrelin after having consumed the milkshake, so the difference between the final 2 data points on each line there. The post-consumptive interaction has a p-value of 0.02, which is within significance if you consider significance to be 0.05.
Okay.
Not if you consider it to be 0.01, which is probably where it should be, but 0.05 is a convention, fine, that's the convention, okay. Although, in a crafty footnote that they put in the paper, they don't put this in their main findings, they put this in a crafty footnote. They say that the weight of participants is known to impact ghrelin levels. So they ran an analysis with an adjustment for weight. And after that adjustment, the p-value was still significant, but it changed to 0.03. So still significant, but less significant than it was. Mm-hmm. If you adjust for weight. But in their main data, they don't put the weight adjustment in. It's just in a little footnote that says, by the way, if we adjust for weight,
which you probably should do that, I imagine. But okay, I'm not an expert, but yeah, that sounds doable.
However, if you look at the totality of the data, so if you look at the difference between the groups from baseline, not from just the point at where the milkshake was consumed, the result is less significant again, just scraping in with a p-value of 0.04. That's with and without an adjustment for weight. So you just scrape into significance there. So overall, this is a tiny study with reasons to be concerned about flaws in the primary outcome measure. Nothing to indicate whether the researchers were blind. The people were blind just to what milkshakes they were having, but we don't know that the researchers were. We don't know that the people doing the ghrelin tests, we don't know what they, did they know that this was an indulgent person or not? The paper doesn't say. So we don't know about the blinding of the thing. A baseline which seems to deviate from published norms quite substantially. An effect size which is an order of magnitude smaller than normal variation, and it barely scrapes into statistical significance. Not only that, I don't know that it's reasonable to call this a study on a placebo effect. Certainly the authors don't describe it that way. The word placebo appears only once in the paper outside of the references section. and there it's used as an analogy that says, like a placebo effect, maybe anticipated.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is real and true, then it's conditioning. It's not.
That certainly would be an effect of classical conditioning that would have to be ruled out here as well. But if it is the case that ghrelin increases with anticipation of consuming food, well, what a shock.
Yeah.
Being shown tasty food makes you more hungry. Therefore, the placebo effect is... What on earth are you talking about?
Yeah, there's biological plausibility that this might be a biological effect. We just don't know enough about how ghrelin works yet.
But whichever way you slice this, I'm not sure you could call this a dramatic effect, which is how the authors describe it, and certainly not tell someone that a normal milkshake is a diet beverage and his gut will respond as if the drink were low fat, which is how the New York Times have described this.
Yeah.
That's all I've got to say about the New York Times article for now. It's a big article and we'd be here all day if I tried to talk about all of it now. But just on this initial examination, we can see that we've got many of the same problems that we've seen time and again before. This is more oversold research, initially by the authors, but then again by the press. Perhaps next time they're going to have something a little more persuasive for us to look at. So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is tonight at the Casa on Hope Street. We've got Charlotte Hardman coming from the University of Liverpool to talk to us about chocolate, which is always a great topic to talk about. We're all going to be overflowing with ghrelin in anticipation of the tasty, tasty chocolate that we're going to be eating, but then it will plummet afterwards as soon as we have been satiated by the chocolate expanding our stomachs, because we will eat that much of it. That is 7:30 in the Casa on Hope Street. But now the QED's done and dusted and out of the way, we've got nothing else that we need to plug. It's it's nice, relaxed, happy days, aside from that one big thing that we've not mentioned. But
soon
people will find out about that sooner rather than later. All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.